Chapter 41. The Constable, His Clue, and the Cab. Miss Coleman, getting up in a fluster, went hurrying to the door. "I won't have that young man in my house. I won't have him. Don't let him dare to put his nose across my doorstep." I endeavored to appease her perturbation. "I promise you that he shall not come in, Miss Coleman. My friend here and I will go and speak to him outside." She held the front door open just wide enough to enable Lessingham and me to slip through, then she shut it after us with a bang. She evidently had a strong objection to any intrusion on Sidney's part. Standing just without the gate, he saluted us with a characteristic vigor, which was scarcely flattering to our late hostess. Behind him was a constable. "I hope you two have been mewed in with that old pussy long enough. While you've been tittle-tattling I've been doing, listen to what this Bobby's got to say." The constable, his thumbs thrust inside his belt, wore an indulgent smile upon his countenance. He seemed to find Sidney amusing. He spoke in a deep bass voice, as if it issued from his boots. "I don't know that I've got anything to say." It was plain that Sidney thought otherwise. "You wait till I've given this pretty pair of gossips a lead, officer, then I'll trot you out." He turned to us. After I'd poked my nose into every dashed hole in that infernal den and been rewarded with nothing but a pain in the back for my trouble, I stood cooling my heels on the doorstep, wondering if I should fight the cabman or get him to fight me, just to pass the time away, for he says he can box, and he looks it, when who should come strolling along but this magnificent example of the Metropolitan Constabulary. He waved his hand towards the policeman, whose grin grew wider. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then, when we'd had enough of admiring each other's fine features and striking proportions, he said to me, "Has he gone?" I said, "Who? Baxter or Bob Brown?" He said, "No, the Arab." I said, "What do you know about any Arab?" He said, "Well, I saw him in the Broadway about 3/4 of an hour ago, and then, seeing you here and the house all open, I wondered if he had gone for good." With that, I almost jumped out of my skin, though you can bet your life I never showed it. I said, "How do you know it was he?" He said, "It was him right enough, there's no doubt about that. If you've seen him once, you're not likely to forget him." Where was he going? He was talking to a cabman, four-wheeler. He got a great bundle on his head, wanted to take it inside with him. Cabman didn't seem to see it. That was enough for me. I picked this most deserving officer up in my arms and carried him across the road to you two fellows like a flash of lightning. Since the policeman was 6 feet 3 or 4, and more than sufficiently broad in proportion, his scarcely seemed the kind of figure to be picked up in anybody's arms and carried like a flash of lightning, which, as his smile grew more indulgent, he himself appeared to think. Still, even allowing for Atherton's exaggeration, the news which he had brought was sufficiently important. I questioned the constable upon my own account. "There is my card. Officer, probably, before the day is over. A charge of a very serious character will be preferred against the person who has been residing in the house over the way. In the meantime, it is of the utmost importance that a watch should be kept upon his movements. I suppose you have no sort of doubt that the person you saw in the Broadway was the one in question?" "Not a morsel. I know him as well as I do my own brother. We all do upon this beat. He's known amongst us as the Arab. I've had my eye on him ever since he came to the place. A queer fish he is. I always have said that he's up to some game or other. I never came across one like him for flying about in all sorts of weather, at all hours of the night, always tearing along as if for his life. As I was telling this gentleman I saw him in the Broadway, well, now it's about an hour since, perhaps a little more. I was coming on duty when I saw a crowd in front of the district railway station, and there was the Arab having a sort of argument with the cabman. He had a great bundle on his head, 5 or 6 feet long, perhaps longer. He wanted to take this great bundle with him into the cab, and the cabman, he didn't see it. You didn't wait to see him drive off. No, I hadn't time. I was due at the station. I was cutting it pretty fine as it was. You didn't speak to him or to the cabman. No, it wasn't any business of mine, you understand. The whole thing just caught my eye as I was passing. And you didn't take the cabman's number? No. Well, as far as that goes, it wasn't needful. I know the cabman, his name and all about him, his stables in Bradmore. I whipped out my notebook. Give me his address. I don't know what his Christian name is, Tom, I believe, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, his surname's Ellis and his address is Church Mews, St. John's Road, Bradmore. I don't know his number, but anyone will tell you which is his place. If you ask for Four-Wheel Ellis, that's the name he's known by among his pals because of his driving a four-wheeler. Thank you, officer. I am obliged to you. 2 half-crowns changed hands. If you will keep an eye on the house and advise me at the address which you will find on my card of anything which takes place there during the next few days, you will do me a service. We had clambered back into the hansom. The driver was just about to start when the constable was struck by a sudden thought. One moment, sir. Blessed if I wasn't going to forget the most important bit of all. I did hear him tell Ellis where to drive him to. He kept saying it over and over again in that queer lingo of his. Waterloo Railway Station. Waterloo Railway Station. All right, said Ellis. I'll drive you to Waterloo Railway Station right enough, only I'm not going to have that bundle of yours inside my cab. There isn't room for it, so you put it on the roof. To Waterloo Railway Station, said the Arab. I take my bundle with me to Waterloo Railway Station. I take it with me. Who says you don't take it with you? Said Ellis. You can take it, and 20 more besides for all I care, only you don't take it inside my cab, put it on the roof. I take it with me to Waterloo Railway Station, said the Arab, and there they were, wrangling and jangling, and neither seeming to be able to make out what the other was after, and the people all laughing. Waterloo Railway Station? You are sure that was what he said? I'll take my oath to it, because I said to myself, when I heard it, I wonder what you'll have to pay for that little lot for the district railway stations outside the 4-mile radius. As we drove off, I was inclined to ask myself, a little bitterly, and perhaps unjustly, if it were not characteristic of the average London policeman to almost forget the most important part of his information, at any rate, to leave it to the last and only to bring it to the front on having his palm crossed with silver. As the hansom bowled along, we three had what occasionally approached a warm discussion. Marjorie was in that bundle, began Lessingham in the most lugubrious of tones and with the most woe-begone of faces. I doubt it, I observed. She was. I feel it. I know it. She was either dead and mutilated or gagged and drugged and helpless. All that remains is vengeance. I repeat that I doubt it. Atherton struck in. I am bound to say, with the best will in the world to think otherwise, that I agree with Lessingham. You are wrong. It's all very well for you to talk in that cocksure way, but it's easier for you to say I'm wrong than to prove it. If I am wrong, and if Lessingham's wrong, how do you explain his extraordinary insistence on taking it inside the cab with him, which the bobby describes? If there wasn't something horrible, awful in that bundle of his, of which he feared the discovery, why was he so reluctant to have it placed upon the roof? There probably was something in it which he was particularly anxious should not be discovered, but I doubt if it was anything of the kind which you suggest. Here is Marjorie in a house alone. Nothing has been seen of her since. Her clothing, her hair, is found hidden away under the floor. This scoundrel sallies forth with a huge bundle on his head. The bobby speaks of it being 5 or 6 feet long, or longer, a bundle which he regards with so much solicitude that he insists on never allowing it to go, for a single instant, out of his sight and reach. What is in the thing? Don't all the facts most unfortunately point in one direction? Mr. Lessingham covered his face with his hands and groaned. I fear that Mr. Atherton is right. I differ from you both. Sidney at once became heated. Then perhaps you can tell us what was in the bundle. I fancy I could make a guess of the contents. Oh, you could you, then, perhaps, for our sakes, you'll make it, and not play the oracular owl? Lessingham and I are interested in this business, after all. It contained the bearer's personal property, that and nothing more. Stay, before you jeer at me, suffer me to finish. If I am not mistaken as to the identity of the person whom the constable describes as the Arab, I apprehend that the contents of that bundle were of much more importance to him than if they had consisted of Miss Linden, either dead or living. More. I am inclined to suspect that if the bundle was placed on the roof of the cab, and if the driver did meddle with it, and did find out the contents and understand them, he would have been driven, out of hand, stark, staring, mad. Sidney was silent, as if he reflected. I imagine he perceived there was something in what I said, but what has become of Miss Linden? I fancy that Miss Linden at this moment is somewhere. I don't, just now, know exactly where, but I hope very shortly to be able to give you a clearer notion, attired in a rotten, dirty pair of boots, a filthy, tattered pair of trousers, a ragged, unwashed apology for a shirt, a greasy, ancient, shapeless coat, and a frowsy, peaked cloth cap. They stared at me, open-eyed. Atherton was the first to speak. "What on earth do you mean?" I mean that it seems to me that the facts point in the direction of my conclusions rather than yours, and that very strongly too. Miss Coleman asserts that she saw Miss Linden return into the house, that within a few minutes the blind was replaced at the front window, and that shortly after a young man, attired in the costume I have described, came walking out of the front door. I believe that young man was Miss Marjorie Linden. Lessingham and Atherton both broke out into interrogations, with Sidney, as usual, loudest. But, man alive, what on earth should make her do a thing like that? Marjorie, the most retiring, modest girl on all God's earth, walk about in broad daylight in such a costume, and for no reason at all. My dear Chamnell, you are suggesting that she first of all went mad. She was in a state of trance. Good God. Chamnell, well, then you think that juggling villain did get hold of her? Undoubtedly. Here is my view of the case. Mind, it is only a hypothesis, and you must take it for what it is worth. It seems to me quite clear that the Arab, as we will call the person for the sake of identification, was somewhere about the premises when you thought he wasn't. But where? We looked upstairs and downstairs and everywhere. Where could he have been? That, as at present advised, I am not prepared to say, but I think you may take it for granted that he was there. He hypnotized the man Holt and sent him away, intending you to go after him, and so being rid of you both. The deuce he did, Chamnell. You write me down an ass. As soon as the coast was clear, he discovered himself to Miss Linden, who, I expect, was disagreeably surprised, and hypnotized her. The hound. The devil! The first exclamation was Lessingham's, the second Sidney's. He then constrained her to strip herself to the skin. The wretch! The fiend! He cut off her hair. He hid it and her clothes under the floor where we found them, where I think it probable that he had already some ancient masculine garments concealed. By Jove, I shouldn't be surprised if they were Holt's. I remember the man saying that that nice joker stripped him of his duds, and certainly when I saw him and when Marjorie found him, he had absolutely nothing on but a queer sort of cloak. Can it be possible that that humorous professor of hanky-panky, may all the maledictions of the accursed alight upon his head, can have sent Marjorie Linden, the daintiest damsel in the land, into the streets of London, rigged out in Holt's old togs? As to that, I am not able to give an authoritative opinion, but, if I understand you aright, it at least is possible. Anyhow, I am disposed to think that he sent Miss Linden after the man Holt, taking it for granted that he had eluded you. That's it. Write me down an ass again. That he did elude you, you have yourself admitted. That's because I stopped talking with that mutton-headed Bobby. I'd have followed the man to the ends of the earth if it hadn't been for that. Precisely. The reason is immaterial. It is the fact with which we are immediately concerned. He did elude you, and I think you will find that Miss Linden and Mr. Holt are together at this moment. In men's clothing? Both in men's clothing, or rather, Miss Linden is in a man's rags. Great Potiphar! To think of Marjorie like that, and where they are, the Arab is not very far off either. Lessingham caught me by the arm. And what diabolical mischief do you imagine that he proposes to do to her? I shirked the question. Whatever it is our business to prevent his doing it. And where do you think they have been taken? That it will be our immediate business to endeavor to discover, and here, at any rate, we are at Waterloo. Chapter 42. The Quarry Doubles. I turned towards the booking office on the main departure platform. As I went, the chief platform inspector, George Bellingham, with whom I had some acquaintance, came out of his office. I stopped him. "Mr. Bellingham, will you be so good as to step with me to the booking office and instruct the clerk in charge to answer 1 or 2 questions which I wish to put to him? I will explain to you afterwards what is their exact import, but you know me sufficiently to be able to believe me when I say that they refer to a matter in which every moment is of the first importance." He turned and accompanied us into the interior of the booking case. "To which of the clerks, Mr. Champnell, do you wish to put your questions?" "To the one who issues third-class tickets to Southampton." Bellingham beckoned to a man who was counting a heap of money and apparently seeking to make it tally with the entries in a huge ledger which lay open before him. He was a short, slightly built young fellow with a pleasant face and smiling eyes. "Mr. Stone, this gentleman wishes to ask you 1 or 2 questions." I am at his service. I put my questions. "I want to know, Mr. Stone, if in the course of the day you have issued any tickets to a person dressed in Arab costume." His reply was prompt. "I have, by the last train, the 7:25, 3 singles." 3 singles? Then my instinct had told me rightly. "Can you describe the person?" Mr. Stone's eyes twinkled. "I don't know that I can, except in a general way. He was uncommonly old and uncommonly ugly, and he had a pair of the most extraordinary eyes I ever saw. They gave me a sort of all-overish feeling when I saw them glaring at me through the pigeonhole. But I can tell you one thing about him. He had a great bundle on his head, which he steadied with one hand, and as it bulged out in all directions, its presence didn't make him popular with other people who wanted tickets too. Undoubtedly, this was our man. You are sure he asked for 3 tickets? Certain. He said 3 tickets to Southampton, laid down the exact fare, 19 and 6, and held up 3 fingers like that. 3 nasty-looking fingers they were, with nails as long as talons. You didn't see who were his companions? I didn't. I didn't try to look. I gave him his tickets, and off he went, with the people grumbling at him because that bundle of his kept getting in their way. Bellingham touched me on the arm. "I can tell you about the Arab of whom Mr. Stone speaks." My attention was called to him by his insisting on taking his bundle with him into the carriage. It was an enormous thing. He could hardly squeeze it through the door. It occupied the entire seat. But as there weren't as many passengers as usual, and he wouldn't, or couldn't, be made to understand that his precious bundle would be safe in the luggage van along with the rest of the luggage, and as he wasn't the sort of person you could argue with to any advantage, I had him put into an empty compartment, bundle and all. Was he alone then? I thought so at the time. He said nothing about having more than 1 ticket or any companions, but just before the train started 2 other men, English men, got into his compartment, and as I came down the platform, the ticket inspector at the barrier informed me that these 2 men were with him, because he held tickets for the 3, which, as he was a foreigner and they seemed English, struck the inspector as odd. Could you describe the 2 men? I couldn't, not particularly, but the man who had charge of the barrier might. I was at the other end of the train when they got in. All I noticed was that one seemed to be a commonplace-looking individual, and that the other was dressed like a tramp, all rags and tatters, a disreputable-looking object he appeared to be. That, I said to myself, was Miss Marjorie Linden, the lovely daughter of a famous house, the wife-elect of a coming statesman. To Bellingham, I remarked aloud. I want you to strain a point, Mr. Bellingham, and to do me a service which I assure you you shall never have any cause to regret. I want you to wire instructions down the line to detain this Arab and his companions and to keep them in custody until the receipt of further instructions. They are not wanted by the police as yet, but they will be as soon as I am able to give certain information to the authorities at Scotland Yard, and wanted very badly. But, as you will perceive for yourself, until I am able to give that information, every moment is important. Where's the station superintendent? He's gone. At present, I'm in charge. Then will you do this for me? I repeat that you shall never have any reason to regret it. I will, if you'll accept all responsibility. I'll do that with the greatest pleasure. Bellingham looked at his watch. It's about 20 minutes to 9. The train scheduled for Basingstoke at 9:6. If we wire to Basingstoke at once, they ought to be ready for them when they come. Good. The wire was sent. We were shown into Bellingham's office to await results. Lessingham paced agitatedly to and fro. He seemed to have reached the limits of his self-control, and to be in a condition in which movement of some sort was an absolute necessity. The mercurial Sidney, on the contrary, leaned back in a chair, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands thrust deep into his trouser pockets, and stared at Lessingham, as if he found relief to his feelings in watching his companion's restlessness. I, for my part, drew up as full a precis of the case as I deemed advisable, and as time permitted, which I dispatched by one of the company's police to Scotland Yard. Then I turned to my associates. Now, gentlemen, it's past dinner time. We may have a journey in front of us. If you take my advice, you'll have something to eat. Lessingham shook his head. I want nothing. Nor I, echoed Sidney. I started up. You must pardon my saying nonsense, but surely you, of all men, Mr. Lessingham, should be aware that you will not improve the situation by rendering yourself incapable of seeing it through. Come and dine. I hailed them off with me, willy-nilly, to the refreshment room. I dined, after a fashion. Mr. Lessingham swallowed with difficulty a plate of soup. Sidney nibbled at a plate of the most unpromising-looking chicken and ham. He proved, indeed, more intractable than Lessingham, and was not to be persuaded to tackle anything easier of digestion. I was just about to take cheese after chop when Bellingham came hastening in his hand an open telegram. "The birds have flown," he cried. "Flown? How?" In reply, he gave me the telegram. I glanced at it. It ran, "Persons described not in the train. Guard says they got out at Vauxhall, have wired Vauxhall to advise you." "That's a level-headed chap," said Bellingham, "the man who sent that telegram. His wiring to Vauxhall should save us a lot of time. We ought to hear from there directly. Hullo, what's this? I shouldn't be surprised if this is it." As he spoke, a porter entered. He handed an envelope to Bellingham. We all three kept our eyes fixed on the inspector's face as he opened it. When he perceived the contents, he gave an exclamation of surprise. "This Arab of yours and his 2 friends seem rather a curious lot, Mr. Chamnell." He passed the paper on to me. It took the form of a report. Lessingham and Sidney, regardless of forms and ceremonies, leaned over my shoulder as I read it. Passengers by 7:30 Southampton, on arrival of train, complained of noises coming from a compartment in coach 8964. Stated that there had been shrieks and yells ever since the train left Waterloo, as if someone was being murdered. An Arab and 2 Englishmen got out of the compartment in question, apparently the party referred to in wire, just to hand from Basingstoke. All 3 declared that there was nothing the matter, that they had been shouting for fun. Arab gave up 3/3 singles for Southampton, saying, in reply to questions, that they had changed their minds and did not want to go any farther. As there were no signs of a struggle or of violence, nor apparently any definite cause for detention, they were allowed to pass. They took a four-wheeler, number 09435. The Arab and one man went inside and the other man on the box. They asked to be driven to Commercial Road, Limehouse. The cab has since returned. Driver says he put the three men down, at their request, in Commercial Road at the corner of Sutcliffe Street, near the East India Docks. They walked up Sutcliffe Street, the Englishman in front and the Arab behind, took the first turning to the right, and after that he saw nothing of them. The driver further states that all the way the Englishman inside, who was so ragged and dirty that he was reluctant to carry him, kept up a sort of wailing noise which so attracted his attention that he twice got off his box to see what was the matter, and each time he said it was nothing. The cabman is of opinion that both the Englishmen were of weak intellect. We were of the same impression here. They said nothing, except at the seeming instigation of the Arab, but when spoken to, stared and gaped like lunatics. It may be mentioned that the Arab had with him an enormous bundle, which he persisted, in spite of all remonstrances, on taking with him inside the cab. As soon as I had mastered the contents of the report and perceived what I believed to be, unknown to the writer himself, its hideous inner meaning, I turned to Bellingham. With your permission, Mr. Bellingham, I will keep this communication. It will be safe in my hands. You will be able to get a copy, and it may be necessary that I should have the original to show to the police. If any inquiries are made for me from Scotland Yard, tell them that I have gone to the Commercial Road and that I will report my movements from Limehouse Police Station. In another minute we were once more traversing the streets of London, three in a hansom cab. Chapter 43. The Murder at Mrs. Enderson's. It is something of a drive from Waterloo to Limehouse. It seems longer when all your nerves are tingling with anxiety to reach your journey's end, and the cab I had hit upon proved to be not the fastest I might have chosen. For some time after our start we were silent. Each was occupied with his own thoughts. Then Lessingham, who was sitting at my side, said to me, "Mr. Champnell, you have that report." "I have." "Will you let me see it once more?" I gave it to him. He read it once, twice, and I fancy yet again. I purposely avoided looking at him as he did so. Yet all the while I was conscious of his pallid cheeks, the twitched muscles of his mouth, the feverish glitter of his eyes, this leader of men, whose predominant characteristic in the House of Commons was immobility, was rapidly approximating to the condition of a hysterical woman. The mental strain which he had been recently undergoing was proving too much for his physical strength. This disappearance of the woman he loved bade fair to be the final straw. I felt convinced that unless something was done quickly to relieve the strain upon his mind, he was nearer to a state of complete mental and moral collapse than he himself imagined. Had he been under my orders, I should have commanded him to at once return home, and not to think. But conscious that, as things were, such a direction would be simply futile, I decided to do something else instead. Feeling that suspense was for him the worst possible form of suffering, I resolved to explain, so far as I was able, precisely what it was I feared and how I proposed to prevent it. Presently there came the question for which I had been waiting, in a harsh, broken voice which no one who had heard him speak on a public platform or in the House of Commons would have recognized as his. "Mr. Champnell, who do you think this person is of whom the report from Vauxhall Station speaks as being all in rags and tatters?" He knew perfectly well, but I understood the mental attitude which induced him to prefer that the information should seem to come from me. "I hope that it will prove to be Miss Linden." "Hope?" He gave a sort of gasp. "Yes, hope, because if it is, I think it possible, nay, probable, that within a few hours you will have her again enfolded in your arms. Pray God that it may be so. Pray God, pray the good God." I did not dare to look round, for, from the tremor which was in his tone, I was persuaded that in the speaker's eyes were tears. Atherton continued silent. He was leaning half out of the cab, staring straight ahead, as if he saw in front a young girl's face, from which he could not remove his glance, and which beckoned him on. After a while, Lessingham spoke again, as if half to himself and half to me. This mention of the shrieks on the railway and of the wailing noise in the cab, what must this wretch have done to her? How my darling must have suffered! That was a theme on which I myself scarcely ventured to allow my thoughts to rest. The notion of a gently nurtured girl being at the mercy of that fiend incarnate, possessed, as I believed that so-called Arab to be possessed, of all the paraphernalia of horror and of dread, was one which caused me tangible shrinkings of the body. Whence had come those shrieks and yells, of which the writer of the report spoke, which had caused the Arab's fellow passengers to think that murder was being done? What unimaginable agony had caused them? What speechless torture? And the wailing noise, which had induced the prosaic, indurated London cabman to get twice off his box to see what was the matter. What anguish had been provocative of that? The helpless girl who had already endured so much, endured, perhaps, that to which death would have been preferred, shut up in that rattling, jolting box on wheels, alone with that diabolical Asiatic, with the enormous bundle, which was but the lurking place of nameless terrors. What might she not, while being borne through the heart of civilized London, have been made to suffer? What had she not been made to suffer to have kept up the continued wailing noise? It was not a theme on which it was wise to permit one's thoughts to linger, and particularly was it clear that it was one from which Lessingham's thoughts should have been kept as far as possible away. Come, Mr. Lessingham, neither you nor I will do himself any good by permitting his reflections to flow in a morbid channel. Let us talk of something else. By the way, weren't you due to speak in the House tonight? Due? Yes, I was due, but what does it matter? But have you acquainted no one with the cause of your non-attendance? Acquaint. Whom should I acquaint? My good sir, listen to me, Mr. Lessingham. Let me entreat you very earnestly to follow my advice. Call another cab, or take this, and go at once to the House. It is not too late. Play the man. Deliver the speech you have undertaken to deliver. Perform your political duties. By coming with me, you will be a hindrance rather than a help, and you may do your reputation an injury from which it never may recover. Do as I counsel you, and I will undertake to do my very utmost to let you have good news by the time your speech is finished. He turned on me with a bitterness for which I was unprepared. If I were to go down to the House and try to speak in the state in which I am now, they would laugh at me. I should be ruined. Do you not run an equally great risk of being ruined by staying away? He gripped me by the arm. Mr. Champnell, do you know that I am on the verge of madness? Do you know that as I am sitting here by your side, I am living in a dual world? I am going on and on to catch that fiend, and I am back again in that Egyptian den, upon that couch of rugs, with the woman of the songs beside me, and Marjorie is being torn and tortured and burnt before my eyes. God help me. Her shrieks are ringing in my ears. He did not speak loudly, but his voice was none the less impressive on that account. I endeavored my hardest to be stern. I confess that you disappoint me, Mr. Lessingham. I have always understood that you were a man of unusual strength. You appear, instead, to be a man of extraordinary weakness, with an imagination so ill-governed that its ebullitions remind me of nothing so much as feminine hysterics. Your wild language is not warranted by circumstances. I repeat that I think it quite possible that by tomorrow morning she will be returned to you. Yes, but how? As the Marjorie I have known, as I saw her last, or how? That was the question which I had already asked myself. In what condition would she be when we had succeeded in snatching her from her captor's grip? It was a question to which I had refused to supply an answer. To him, I lied by implication. Let us hope that, with the exception of being a trifle scared, she will be as sound and hale and hearty as ever in her life. Do you yourself believe that she'll be like that, untouched, unchanged, unstained? Then I lied right out. It seemed to me necessary to calm his growing excitement. I do. You don't. Mr. Lessingham, do you think that I can't see your face and read in it the same thoughts which trouble me? As a man of honor, do you care to deny that when Marjorie Linden is restored to me, if she ever is, you fear she will be but the mere soiled husk of the Marjorie whom I knew and loved? Even supposing that there may be a modicum of truth in what you say, which I am far from being disposed to admit, what good purpose do you propose to serve by talking in such a strain? None, no good purpose, unless it be the desire of looking the truth in the face. For, Mr. Chamnell, you must not seek to play with me the hypocrite, nor try to hide things from me as if I were a child. If my life is ruined, it is ruined. Let me know it, and look the knowledge in the face. That, to me, is to play the man. I was silent. The wild tale he had told me of that Cairene inferno, oddly enough, yet why? Oddly, for the world is all coincidence, had thrown a flood of light on certain events which had happened some 3 years previously, and which ever since had remained shrouded in mystery. The conduct of the business afterwards came into my hands, and briefly what had occurred was this. 3 persons, 2 sisters and their brother, who was younger than themselves, members of a decent English family, were going on a trip round the world. They were young, adventurous, and, not to put too fine a point on it, foolhardy. The evening after their arrival in Cairo, by way of what is called a lark, in spite of the protestations of people who were better informed than themselves, they insisted on going, alone, for a ramble through the native quarter. They went, but they never returned, or, rather, the 2 girls never returned. After an interval, the young man was found again, what was left of him. A fuss was made when there were no signs of their reappearance, but as there were no relations, nor even friends of theirs, but only casual acquaintances on board the ship by which they had traveled, perhaps not so great a fuss as might have been was made. Anyhow, nothing was discovered. Their widowed mother, alone in England, wondering how it was that beyond the receipt of a brief wire acquainting her with their arrival at Cairo, she had heard nothing further of their wanderings, placed herself in communication with the diplomatic people over there to learn that, to all appearances, her 3 children had vanished from off the face of the earth. Then a fuss was made, with a vengeance. So far as one can judge, the whole town and neighborhood was turned pretty well upside down. But nothing came of it. So far as any results were concerned, the authorities might just as well have left the mystery of their vanishment alone. It continued where it was, in spite of them. However, some 3 months afterwards, a youth was brought to the British Embassy by a party of friendly Arabs who asserted that they had found him naked and nearly dying in some remote spot in the Wadi Halfa desert. It was the brother of the 2 lost girls. He was as nearly dying as he very well could be without being actually dead when they brought him to the embassy, and in a state of indescribable mutilation. He seemed to rally for a time under careful treatment, but he never again uttered a coherent word. It was only from his delirious ravings that any idea was formed of what had really occurred. Shorthand notes were taken of some of the utterances of his delirium. Afterwards, they were submitted to me. I remembered the substance of them quite well, and when Mr. Lessingham began to tell me of his own hideous experiences, they came back to me more clearly still. Had I laid those notes before him, I have little doubt but that he would have immediately perceived that 17 years after the adventure which had left such an indelible scar upon his own life, this youth, he was little more than a boy, had seen the things which he had seen, and suffered the nameless agonies and degradations which he had suffered. The young man was perpetually raving about some indescribable den of horror which was own brother to Lessingham's temple, and about some female monster. whom he regarded with such fear and horror that every allusion he made to her was followed by a convulsive paroxysm which taxed all the ingenuity of his medical attendants to bring him out of. He frequently called upon his sisters by name, speaking of them in a manner which inevitably suggested that he had been an unwilling and helpless witness of hideous tortures which they had undergone, and then he would rise in bed, screaming, "They're burning them! They're burning them! Devils! Devils!" And at those times it required all the strength of those who were in attendance to restrain his maddened frenzy. The youth died in one of these fits of great preternatural excitement, without, as I have previously written, having given utterance to one single coherent word, and by some of those who were best able to judge it was held to have been a mercy that he did die without having been restored to consciousness. And presently tales began to be whispered about some idolatrous sect which was stated to have its headquarters somewhere in the interior of the country, some located it in this neighborhood, and some in that, which was stated to still practice, and to always have practiced, in unbroken historical continuity, the debased, unclean, mystic, and bloody rites of a form of idolatry which had had its birth in a period of the world's story which was so remote that to all intents and purposes it might be described as prehistoric. While the ferment was still at its height, a man came to the British Embassy who said that he was a member of a tribe which had its habitat on the banks of the White Nile. He asserted that he was in association with this very idolatrous sect, though he denied that he was one of the actual sectaries. He did admit, however, that he had assisted more than once at their orgies, and declared that it was their constant practice to offer young women as sacrifices, preferably white Christian women, with a special preference, if they could get them, to young English women. He vowed that he himself had seen with his own eyes English girls burnt alive. The description which he gave of what preceded and followed these foul murders appalled those who listened. He finally wound up by offering, on payment of a stipulated sum of money, to guide a troop of soldiers to this den of demons so that they should arrive there at a moment when it was filled with worshippers, who were preparing to participate in an orgy which was to take place during the next few days. His offer was conditionally accepted. He was confined in an apartment with one man on guard inside and another on guard outside the room. That night the sentinel without was startled by hearing a great noise and frightful screams issuing from the chamber in which the native was interned. He summoned assistance. The door was opened. The soldier on guard within was stark, staring mad. He died within a few months, a gibbering maniac to the end. The native was dead. The window, which was a very small one, was securely fastened inside and strongly barred without. There was nothing to show by what means entry had been gained. Yet it was the general opinion of those who saw the corpse that the man had been destroyed by some wild beast. A photograph was taken of the body after death, a copy of which is still in my possession. In it are distinctly shown lacerations about the neck and the lower portion of the abdomen, as if they had been produced by the claws of some huge and ferocious animal. The skull is splintered in half a dozen places, and the face is torn to rags. That was more than 3 years ago. The whole business has remained as great a mystery as ever. But my attention has once or twice been caught by trifling incidents, which have caused me to more than suspect that the wild tale told by that murdered native had in it at least the elements of truth, and which have even led me to wonder if the trade in kidnapping was not being carried on to this very hour, and if women of my own flesh and blood were not still being offered up on that infernal altar. And now here was Paul Lessingham, a man of worldwide reputation, of great intellect, of undoubted honor, who had come to me with a wholly unconscious verification of all my worst suspicions. That the creature spoken of as an Arab, and who was probably no more an Arab than I was, and whose name was certainly not Mohammed el-Khair, was an emissary from that den of demons, I had no doubt. What was the exact purport of the creature's presence in England was another question. Possibly part of the intention was the destruction of Paul Lessingham, body, soul, and spirit. Possibly another part was the procuration of fresh victims for that long drawn-out Holocaust. That this latter object explained the disappearance of Miss Linden, I felt persuaded. That she was designed by the personification of evil, who was her captor, to suffer all the horrors at which the stories pointed, and then to be burned alive amidst the triumphant yells of the attendant demons, I was certain. That the wretch, aware that the pursuit was in full cry, was tearing, twisting, doubling, and would stick at nothing which would facilitate the smuggling of the victim out of England, was clear. My interest in the quest was already far other than a merely professional one. The blood in my veins tingled at the thought of such a woman as Miss Linden being in the power of such a monster. I may assuredly claim that throughout the whole business I was urged forward by no thought of fee or of reward. To have had a share in rescuing that unfortunate girl and in the destruction of her noxious persecutor would have been reward enough for me. One is not always, even in strictly professional matters, influenced by strictly professional instincts. The cab slowed. A voice descended through the trap door. "This is Commercial Road, sir. What part of it do you want? Drive me to Limehouse Police Station." We were driven there. I made my way to the usual inspector behind the usual pigeonhole. "My name is Chamnell. Have you received any communication from Scotland Yard tonight having reference to a matter in which I am interested? Do you mean about the Arab? We received a telephonic message about half an hour ago. Since communicating with Scotland Yard, this has come to hand from the authorities at Vauxhall Station. Can you tell me if anything has been seen of the person in question by the men of your division?" I handed the inspector the report. His reply was laconic. "I will inquire." He passed through a door into an inner room, and the reports went with him. "Beg pardon, sir, but was that a Harab you was a-talking about to the hinspector?" The speaker was a gentleman, unmistakably of the gutter-snipe class. He was seated on a form. Close at hand hovered a policeman, whose special duty it seemed to be to keep an eye upon his movements. "Why do you ask?" "I beg your pardon, sir, but I saw a Harab myself about an hour ago, leastways he looked like as if he was a Harab." "What sort of a looking person was he?" "I can't hardly tell you that, sir, because I didn't never have a proper look at him, but I know he had a bloomin' great bundle on 'is 'ead. It was like this, 'ere. I was comin' round the corner as he was passin'. I never see him till I was right atop of him, so that I haccidentally run agin him. My high, didn't he give me a downer? I was down on the back of my 'ead in the middle of the road before I knew where I was, and 'e was at the other end of the street. If 'e hadn't knocked me more'n 'arf silly, I'd been after him sharp, I tell you, and hosked him what he thought he was a-doing of, but afore my senses was back again, 'e was out of sight, clean. You are sure he had a bundle on his head?" "I noticed it most particular." "How long ago do you say this was, and where?" "About an hour ago, perhaps more, perhaps less." "Was he alone?" "It seemed to me as if a cove was a-follerin' him. Leastways, there was a bloke as was a-keepin' close at 'is heels, though I don't know what his little game was, I'm sure. Ask the pleesman, he knows everythink, the pleesman do." I turned to the pleesman. "Who is this man?" The pleesman put his hands behind his back and threw out his chest. His manner was distinctly affable. "Well, he's being detained upon suspicion. He's given us an address at which to make inquiries, and inquiries are being made. I shouldn't pay too much attention to what he says if I were you. I don't suppose he'd be particular about a lie or two." This frank expression of opinion re-aroused the indignation of the gentleman on the form. "There you hare, at it again. That's just like you peelers, you're all the same. What do you know about me?" "Nothink. This Jen Lehman ain't got no call to believe me, not as I knows on. It's all the same to me if 'e do or don't, but it's truth what I'm sayin', all the same." At this point the inspector reappeared at the pigeonhole. He cut short the flow of eloquence. Now then, not so much noise outside there, he addressed me. None of our men have seen anything of the person you're inquiring for, so far as we're aware. But, if you like, I will place a man at your disposal, and he will go round with you, and you will be able to make your own inquiries. A capless, wildly excited young ragamuffin came dashing in at the street door. He gasped out, as clearly as he could for the speed which he had made, "There's been murder done, Mr. Pleesman. A Harab's killed a bloke." Mr. Pleesman gripped him by the shoulder. "What's that?" The youngster put up his arm and ducked his head, instinctively, as if to ward off a blow. "Leave me alone. I don't want none of your 'andling. I ain't done nothing to you. I tell you, 'e 'as." The inspector spoke through the pigeonhole. "He has what, my lad? What do you say has happened?" "There's been murder done. It's right enough. There 'as, up at Mrs. Enderson's in Paradise Place, a Harab's been and killed a bloke."